Today, I'm going to talk about the BDD and the gauge, two different things, to be honest. Well, let me start with very shocking sentence, but you may already know it. There is no such thing as agile testing. People are keep talking about the agile testing, agile way of, agile, but no. There is, as you can read here, it's a software testing in an agile team. So you have to be a part of a team, okay, as a quality assurance member. So we are keep talking about this idea. We are, working with a lot of clients in their agile transformation projects and try to align with their agile team. So this sentence is that important. I mean, they thought that they need agile testers. No way. You will have the quality assurance members, team members, working and sitting together with your development team, with your analyst team, with your the subject matters. So that is how we call doing agile, doing testing in agile team. So let me start. My presentation is composed of two parts actually. They're slightly connected. I mean, you may already know that a lot of things about BDD, behavior-driven development, but this talk is going to be very introductory talk. So I'm not sure, there might be some advanced users here, but I just prepared for the newcomers. So there will be some introduction about the BDD, behavior-driven development. It is not totally about the testing. It's not about the testing. It's the approach, and you will understand in a few minutes. And I'll also talk about some of the specification language, the gauge, developed by the ThoughtWorks. So there are two parts of my talk, so you don't have to link the BDD with the gauge. You don't have to do that. But I'll just start with some problems and solutions in our area. I'm basically talking about development processes and test processes and software quality assurance type of things. So what are them? If you look at, we see that in any project, in agile or in classical way, in a waterfall model, we always see that miscalculated time and budget frames because that clients are asking for everything for a very short amount of time. They unfortunately they are looking for a lot of things and they are not positioning the quality process into their budgets or planning. And we also see that there is a little user involvement in quality assurance projects. We also see that they are missing to move to shift left approaches. What that means, you have to be, as a quality assurance member or tester or automation engineer, you have to be very close to your team and you have to start early as possible. So, for example, you should start at the backlog design step, let's say, or the requirement definition step. You have to be there at the first step. And these are the other problems: requirement and output validation, the regression sprint. Once the project gets evolved, you have to execute tests again and again, but features are increasing, and you have to retest. You have to add new tests, new candidates to your regression sets, and then you just find yourself in regression sprint. That is another problem. And we see the lack of optimization, lack of communication. It's the root of all errors. You can easily understand and know that. And lack of quality of testing. And we have some tools, not just these tools, of course, but for today I'm going to talk about BDD support for the communication and optimization for the regression. And you can use one of the tools called Gauge for increasing test coverage and reducing risks. Also, having some support from BDD for acceptance criteria. Here are some answers to problems. For example, we see that the subject matters experts, the testers, and developers, they don't talk too much because they are separated. People keep telling that they are doing something in agile way, but when you look at this agile transformation, somehow they don't put all of the best practices in their transformation. So BDD brings these roles together specifically in 3 amigos sessions. So the business, subject matter expert, developer, and tester sit together at the beginning and talk about the project itself. And another one, the other problem, acceptance criteria are missing or poorly defined and wasting in sprint time. You can use some sort of markdown language like Gauge, like Cucumber, like others, like SpecFlow, for writing specifications. So you might have much better, much clearer acceptance criteria for the release, for example. And another one, product features are hard to explain. Yes, at the beginning, this is really common problem. And by defining well-defined specifications and executable specifications, you are able to describe individual behaviors in plain language. And the last one is again about the communication problem. So you can have solutions by applying behavior-driven development. And what is it? Let's look at that. How the BDD improved the development process. Anyone can write in BDD because they are written in plain English. So, or in Dutch, in German, in Turkish, whatever you like to. You just write specifications in a file. And the specifications can be called as scenarios, focus specifically on expected behavior of the product under development. So that reduced some points, some ambitions points, and make things much clearer and to develop and test. You can see that you can take requirements as acceptance criteria later, and then you can convert them to test cases. And BDD can be reused between scenarios. And you can use parameterized approach in BDD for test cases, and examples, concrete examples, can be used with the different data frames or data tables in BDD, for example. Here is one of the example at the product backlog refinement meeting before BDD. You see the subject matter expert asking for some feature like 10% discount on a product for the first when they first buy or when the customer first visit the shop. Then you know how they thought about it. The developer always keep around this code, right? Calculate the discount or something like that. This is the developer mind. I have a development background. I thought always like this, And look at the tester. They thought in that way. I mean, the tester's way, how they make the steps, like this one register, go to enter, search or something like that. See, they have different views, so you have to make them to speak together and come together and communicate in the same language. For example, here is one of the getting approach from Cucumber, like given when then approach here. So they are able to talk in same scenario, using same language, like example here, given the user has not ordered yet, and when, and then, something like that. Not code, not testers away, so they have the common sharing. So we can easily say that BDD, behavior-driven development, is a collaboration practice. So around these conversations, they will have much better understanding to each other. So we call it this 3 amigo session. They come together at the very first meeting and discuss about the product features. Actually, these type of scenarios or specifications are not tailored in that meetings. It is suggested that developer and tester should sit together after these meetings and convert these the requirements to the executable specifications. But at least they speak the same language. Here is one of another example from Gauge. You don't have to use this when given then approach and approach. That was some example from another markdown language. Here in Gauge, you can use the plain language like this one. The control, the user has the 0 order, add book into shopping cart, go to shopping cart, apply 10% of discount coupon, and the verify the discount price are equal, or something like that. So it's very clear, it's very common, everybody can understand from these ones. So very concrete example. But you know, there is some misunderstanding by applying BDD approach to some markdown language, like in this example, gauge. So it's very misguided questions how to do BDD with the gauge, for example. Of course, you can be very close to the BDD specifications, and meanwhile you can also apply some sort of automation, also some sort of testing as well, but it doesn't have to be like that. Here you can see BDD is a collaborative requirement discovery process. The languages like Gauge and Cucumber and SpecFlow, they only define executable specifications and they provide living documentation for, you know, as a result of this discovery process. You have chance to automate these scenarios. You have, you can use some sort of automation tools like Selenium, Appium, some Java code or .NET code at the back as a framework, but you don't have to do that. I mean, you can only have manual test scenarios with specifications written in BDD, so it doesn't have to be automated. And scenarios are really good, are the keys for the good BDD practices. So you don't, the manual test scripting, manual scripts that defines test steps are not BDD scenarios. What I'm trying to say here, click here, and do that, fill that form type of the scripting, manual test scripting is not equal to BDD practices. You have to be very concrete and very clean and very common for the other collaborators. But you might have series of instructions, but these might be like the test scripts, or you may be having some sort of focus on UI, for example, UI automation. But the real BDD approach mostly focused on discovering scenarios or features, but not the scripts. So you shouldn't follow the scripting way if you are really applying BDD. But there are some techniques like domain modeling and feature mapping techniques to generate better executable specifications. So we can apply these approaches. So we talked about these 3 Amigo sessions before, so it's repeated here. And the details are here. They sit together and they participate in one common platform and try to write in plain English or in other language. So these things, these specifications are the requirements for the product owners at the end, and they are the acceptance criteria for the developers. They are the test cases for the testers. They are the scripts for the automators, and they are the descriptions for the stakeholders. So we are trying to reduce the documentation here. In Agile way, we mostly give the value to product and working software, right? So rather than following the hardly documented processes and the workflows, we try to make things much clearer and summarized way. So if we are able to do that by applying BDD, like approaches like BDD, then we should end up with ready documentation, very small amount of documentation for requirements, for test cases, for automation candidates, or something like that. So that means we mentally shift to Agile way of doing it. And you see the common problem here. If you don't start with the unclear acceptance criteria, then you continue with the development, and when you check the results on the left-hand side, then you end up with the change request. Okay? Then you start doing another development stage, and you have to correct yourself, test it again. So the things will get worse and worse. But if you start with the clear acceptance criteria, as in right-hand side, you just develop it. Of course, there will be some changes, but as compared to unclear criteria. That way is much better way where BDD help us in this stage. What I'm trying to say about this clear acceptance criteria. So look at this concrete example. As a teacher, I want to generate assessment reports so I can evaluate the student performance. Very simple, right? So you might thought that that is something, good executable specification. It seems like. So there are some details as well, like which students' current assessment score and etc. But when we will return back to this example. Remember that one. But as a teacher, as in this sentence, to generate an assessment report is not the concrete one. You know why? We have to clarify the business rules. There were no business rule in that specification. What type of assessment we are talking about? What type of students we are talking about? It wasn't really good defined in this example. So we should be focusing on what, not how. We shouldn't focus on how to do it, but we should more focus on the business rules and what to do, for example. So again, some repeats here. You can do it by improving the communication. Look, here it is. What if the current student is Erasmus student or exchange student? If there is no pass exam score or assessment score for that student. So these are the problematic points. You are not able to calculate her or his the grade if you don't start with really concrete example. So these are the problematic points. So if you're using a BDD within Agile teams, you increase the communication. You do have some efficiency in unit testing. You will just learn in a minute, and you increase the efficiency in test automation, and you can generate some basis for the automated tests. It doesn't have to be, but you will have it if you do it in proper way. And it supports, BDD supports early testing, and you reduce the risk and efficiency in documentation because these executable specifications can be automatically transferred into some documentation. Actually, BDD boots TDD and ATDD techniques by applying different tactics. So when you provide an example, and you define a specification by example, you are powering the TDD and ATDD type of development activities.
What's KDD?
Test-driven development, I'm sorry.
KDD.
It is ATD.
Okay.
Is it KDD there? No, ATD.
Also,
Acceptance.
I know.
I'm sorry.
KDD.
Actually, when you look at the history of BDD, this is proposed by Dan North, and there was a really funny story about that. They were working in a project with Chris Stevenson, and this guy Chris was doing TDD. In test-driven development, you start with writing some test case, right? Then failing test case, to be honest. Then you start doing implementing the feature to pass that test working, right? Then you add another test that is failing, and you add some feature to make it pass, or something like that. So write a failing test, make test pass, and refactor. So this is TDD. The developers are very familiar with it. When Chris doing TDD, and in that time, he developed some small software to convert test annotations to plain English. For example, imagine that you put simple annotation at the top of one of the function like, tests for adding new customer, and he transferred this to some plain English like, test space for new customer or something like that. It's just did it because he needs all of the tests listed in one page as documented. So Dan North understand that it's much better way or clear way of listing unit tests in their project. So where the BDD comes. He thought that if they start working on behaviors, then that will make things much clearer for others. Similar to TDD, they start writing a failing future test. Then they make this test pass and refactor it. So very close to TDD, and its roots are coming from the TDD. So they come with the BDD to improve the application of TDD and ATDD. That's all I can talk about the BDD because of the time limitations. Now I'll just move to the gauge. The gauge, I also have an example for you at the end of this presentation. Gauge is a cross-platform test automation framework developed by ThoughtWorks, one of the global firms. It's open source, and you can write test cases in business language. And you can write the specifications very close to BDD. It hasn't to be, but you can write it in that way. And what are the features of Gauge? You will have some data stores, the execution hooks, table-driven execution, and the difference is here. If you compare the Gauge with the Cucumber, you have concept files, which means you have more modularity. You are able to add different steps into another file called concepts to make it more modular or more keyword-driven manner. Also, you have rich documentation, test documentation with Gauge. You'll have execution reports ready there, and you can easily integrate with automation frameworks like Selenium or Appium. Now, we are able to see some examples. I'll just cover them later on by applying it. So you have scenario store, very similar to other getting type languages. So you can get scenarios or the data for the scenarios and the scenarios itself, or put your scenarios. And you have execution hooks like the before sweep, before test, after sweep, after test, and that sort of execution hooks. So you can just add them to your the test. And this is the difference one, the differentiating factor of Gauge as compared to Cucumber, for example. You have the concept file, so you can combine. If you look at here, you have some steps, like the product page, search a product name, open description for the product. So you can combine these steps into another file. We call them concepts. So you will have something like this. Find an open product page for some parameterized value, for example. So for the on product page, do that and search for something, open description for something. So that makes that increase the reusability and maintainability and the efficiency, of course, the concept files. Let me try on and off. I should walk. You have the table-driven data. For example, here we define our table, our data, like under the columns ID and name. So we are able to use this data very easily. You don't have to program. You don't have to type anything, code and do any coding, for example. You see, we only have one line here to create the following projects, and it is going to scan the data behind it, and it will do it. And you have, the very fine test documentation with Gauge. Not good as expected, but at least you have something. And you have chance to work with the libraries like Selenium and Appium as well. I think that's all for the presentation. Now I'm just going to show you what you can do with the Gauge and some specification file examples in BDD. this is a sample project I've generated for you. I'll start with a very basic example. I can make it a little bigger for you. So by using this hashtag, you can define your heading in Gauge. You can also use tags. So later you are able to search your scenarios. For example, you can use these keywords. There are a lot of keywords like simple definition, table read, something like that. And you can also write some explanations. You know, at the end, let me show this one. You will have this documentation. You know what you are looking for, right? So by writing these type of specifications and tag them, you will have, you know, the scenarios, the documentation. Later, if you need to search anything, you have that interface. So you are easily, you know, type something here like example, then you will end up with, you know, the scenarios contains these keywords. I think they all have the example or simple or something like that. That is the documentation part of Gauge. It supports. So you can simply write the plain text for the standard text, and you use these dashed lines for definition of scenarios. For example, here we define very simple print scenario, okay? And the tags, print, symbol, or something like that. It's it's done in CGI. So we have one step here. Look, it's in blue colors and with the parameter. So you can place parameters like this. You can just change this parameter and it goes to the function is used, the backend function used by this line. So, for example, you can define your own sentence, like, you know, check the number of people in the or something like that. You see, now you define one sentence, but it's not connected to any backend code. But you can easily, you know, come here and create a step implementation for that definition. So they can, quality assurance team can write scenarios without knowing anything about, but then developers or automation engineers add some steps for these lines. If I click that one, I'm able to generate some sort of code behind it. But I'll just share one here. So you have free to write anything. Of course, you are free to write in very standard way. For example, you may apply some BDD approach here. Like in this example, it's much better. I mean, if you look at this one, you see it's a bit closer to BDD, you see, but again, it hasn't, the Gauge do not have direct connection with the BDD, but you can apply as it is. Log into evaluation system as teacher, as Joe, with the password this, and you know, the teacher selects list of Erasmus students, and teacher selects student details. These are the parameters, and the message and another parameter must be shown. So you can write like that, and they're all connected to some sort of code. Let me delete this one and show you very basic example. If we look at the code behind this, you see we have the Java, very simple Java code here. So it only prints out some string, now printing the argument, the parameter you send here. So it is in very simple step, and you pass this parameter with this sign. So if you run this example with the new parameter, so you will have, you know, chance to see the result. Again, you have chance to read from static data table. This is our second scenario. So we have list of capital cities of the following countries. You see the output is here. Now printing your name or hat, something like that. This is called table-driven execution. You put some data like country and city, then you are able to read all of the data for your test execution. If you just run this one as well, you will see, I'm sorry, it's going to my browser because of some Selenium implementation is already there, but you know, for this test, we are not using any Selenium. You see, the output is here. Capital of Netherlands, England, USA, something like that. So we are able to read. You are also able to use different sentences for the same functions. What I'm trying to say here, you are able to use aliases. So this function, list capital, this step, list capital cities of following countries is equal to, I want to list capital cities given below. If I check this one, you should easily see that, you know, we have two definitions in this step. So they are all mapped to the same function. That also gives a lot of flexibility. So your QA team member or the analyst can write freely in different sentences, but later you may combine them to the functions. Also, you may be able to read them somewhere. I mean, you don't have to put as test annotation here because that may confuse the things if there's a lot of sentences to be mapped to the same function. But you know, at least we have that type of functionality. And we are able to, you know, read from files like txt file here and CSV files, so we can do some sort of data-driven test from some filing or from some database or something like that. So these are the very basic features of the gauge I'd like to introduce you. I'm just checking the timing, so I'd like to share something else. Okay, so here is the eBay example. It's a bit different. It's not written in completely BDD. It's keyword-driven approach, but here I'd like to show you how you can combine Selenium code with Gauge, for example. Here we have direct link to Java functions, like go to this address, use that thing, and search by iPhone, and etc. And here we have a specification file, plain specification file, composed of steps like go to, click, send key, or something like that. But we are able to combine some of the steps in a concept file, as in here. Look, we put login steps like this one: click, send key, and the click on the password, the login button. These 4 or 5 steps into one line of code. So where the flexibility of concept is. Again, you know, we just combine search steps in a one keyword: search by Android, search by iPhone. So you are also free to use some data-driven execution here. So let me run this, so you can completely run the same full specification. So the 3 of the tests we're going to run and execute, but they will all do the same thing. So they go to the eBay, and, you know, search for, go into eBay and, you know, search for some item. So it goes, it search for iPhone, then for Android, I guess. Go out. Doing the same thing, but by using different approaches. You know, using spec files, concept files, directly calling Java functions. You know, but the same thing again. You know, by applying this type of approach, we are able to let non-technical users to write test automation scenarios. Look, if you look at here, you have bunch of keywords. Let's say you can convert them, of course, to some sort of more explanatory sentences, but at the end you have, you know, this keyword library. So if you have this keyword library specific to that business, like e-commerce or finance, the ones who are not really technical are able to write these scenarios by themselves without knowing any Java code or .NET code or scripting. So they can easily select, look, go to this URL, click on this ID, you know, click the selector, text, expand. Of course, they require some sort of technical background, but there is other tools to get rid of these advanced approaches, like, you know, XPath identifiers and click and type and record type tools or something like that. So, but this is the general approach we mostly use in most of our projects. And Finally, I'll just show you how we have all of these at our tools. In example, you see, if you remember, we have two tools. Well, one is Testinium, and the other one, let me introduce you another two of us, so you can easily try later on if you have time. They're all free to use. You can just go to testinium.com and have the account, also for the loading as well. They are both developed top of open source technologies. This is developed top of Selenium Appium, but you are able to use Cucumber, Gauge, SpecFlow, and other technologies, Java and .NET as well. Here we are using JMeter in Lodium for the performance testing, and Gatling also for the performance testing. So you are free to use it, but I'll just show you one project in Testinium. I'll just do it for the ball.com, because our next speaker is coming from the ball.com, so very good. So when you go to Testinium and you have the main entities like the projects, scenarios, and the suites and reports, so you're able to create a very basic scenario, and let's call it ball, and select the framework like Selenium, create a template, put the ball.com here, select the test type, like now let's select Gauge because we just talked about the Gauge, and put some Git folder name for it, for example, ball, let's say, and save it. Now what I did, I completely generated a test project, automation project, functional test automation project on cloud. It is automatically generated a suite for me to be executed on different platforms. Also added one dummy scenario, which is going to be executed on browser automatically. So you don't have to do anything else. And we also providing you full keyword capabilities. So we have the test plan. So let me run it. Now your test plan is running, and you wonder what is happening. Which scenario is included in that plan. If you go to scenarios and you see the test scenario sample, it is very basic scenario. It's very dummy because we are only able to generate very dummy scenarios, but provide you list of functions to improve them. If you go here and see the code, let me make it bigger. It basically goes to ball.com and wait for 2 seconds and click on random link, and you will have a lot of other functionalities here. If you like to continue your scenario, you can just select any function from here and do it itself. Anyway, once you do that, you will have your reports. The ball, it worked on Windows 8.1, Chrome latest. If you go to details, you see what happened in this test. I mean, it goes to ball.com, click on some random link, that's all. And you will also have the video of it. I mean, if you like to watch the whole process, and you also have the suite of ball.com. For example, if you like to edit it, you have chance to execute. Let's say I want to execute the same thing on Macintosh, or Windows 8, or again Windows 8.1, but not on Chrome, but this time Firefox version this one. Let's say version 60 in this resolution. So I just simply add to my plan. Now I have two platforms to be executed. So if I save it, if I execute it, now my test scenario is going to be executed on that platform. That is basically what Testinium does. I don't want to make it more advertised way, but basically you have whole platform, the Selenium scripting, the Gauge connection or Gherkin connection, and even you are able to download that to your local environment. I mean, you don't have to use the Testinium. As I said, we would like to give back to community, but I'm trying to say, you have your Git project. If I refresh this one, you will see, the ball here. Now, if you go to details, and you are able to clone your project. So if you clone your project, then if you come back your IDE, if you go to terminal, if you just git clone and put the address, then you will have the whole project, and you are able to run it locally. So that is what we provide to the community, for example, with all of the keywords and with all of the functionality. Because at the end, there is some functionality right behind the scene. If you look at here, find that one. If you go to the details of this scenario, the ball.com, if you look at our IDE, online IDE, you don't have to use that IDE, but we also provide that from the web. If you go to the base page utility, you have a bunch of functions to be used. So you don't have to type any of these. So you just need to use that keywords and you can download that and start adding something top of that. And even you don't have to use the Testinium. But we provide the browsers and we provide the mobile devices. If you like to execute this test at Testinium, for example, if I go back here, you know, we have these mobile devices as well. I mean, these are the real mobile devices. So if you have the Appium test, for example, you are free to execute these test cases on our real devices, on real iPhones, iPhone X, and etc. That's all for me. I mean, the time's up for me. You know, I try to be quick, you know, to fit in that time. And thank you for joining again, and thank you for listening. I'm sure that is for my first time. You know, I just need to get used to it. So please shoot if you have any questions, any comments, any additions. You know, just get excited. And thank you, and see you next time in our next event. Any comments? I'd like to hear your comments. You know, because we were chatting with this gentleman. I'm sorry, you know, I lost your name. And you know, would you like to talk about a little bit on this? You know, about your experience, not BDD. You know, how you're facing with the difficulty doing, you know, agile testing. I mean, agile way of testing in agile transformations.
Yeah, thank you, Fırat. This was.
Would you like to come here?
Yeah, sure.
Why not? You know,
Sure.
then you'll have very handsome picture of yours with the camera. Then you know, you'll just send to your friends. Then we will be more popular, right?
Thanks for this talk. I think so. Before I go any further, my name is Brijesh Dev, and I work as a test consultant for Sujati, and I work with a lot of clients across the Netherlands, try and help improve their testing. So this was a great example. And the first line that you used in your slide, that there is no such thing as agile testing, is something that I always tell my customers and people I meet. I am glad that somebody has put it on the slide and used it as the first slide of the presentation. So thank you very much for doing that. You have exactly caught my message.
Okay.
So I'm glad that I'm in great company. Okay. Secondly, talking about the concepts of BDD, I think you've nailed it through your entire presentation. You kept it on a very introductory level, not going so deep and getting into the the nitty-gritties of the thing. But what is essential is to understand that behavior-driven development is focused with the end in mind, as I tell people. So when you work on a project, you've always got to figure out what is the product that you are looking at, what is the solution that you're providing, what is the behavior that you are expecting out of that product, and is it going to solve your problem? And BDD is exactly targeted to do that. So that has come out really well. About Gauge, well, Gauge is new for me, so I have one question there. Maybe you can help me answer that. Does it support Gherkin language?
Yeah.
It does. Okay, so maybe I'll explore more and learn more about it. So, in my experience, I was just talking to Fırat before the event, and I was telling him that in my daily experience, I meet with a lot of customers who are not very clear about their testing concepts, and I've met very strange customers who have not defined their test strategy also, and they just want to test something, but without having the goal or without having the proper idea about what you actually want out of your tests, you don't solve any problems. And I was just talking to him, and I was telling that how we can work as testers within agile teams. It's a very simple implementation. You don't have to talk about Jira or talk about Scrum or anything like that. It's all about mindset. So agile is not a methodology, it's not a process, it's nothing like that. It is a mindset. We have to get that straight first. And the most important thing, or the easiest thing to implement agile, is collaboration, that is working together. So if you want to get something tested, make the tester sit along with the developer. And you, as he starts developing, you start testing along with it. Or even better, if you involve the testers very early when the requirements are getting defined. I am working with one of our customers right now and helping them define requirements. So, what is essential is to understand that behavior-driven development is focused with the end in mind, as I tell people. So when you work on a project, you've always got to figure out what is the solution that you're providing, what is the behavior that you are expecting out of that product, and is it going to solve your problem? And the most important thing, or the most easiest thing to implement agile is focused with the end in mind. So if you want to get something tested, make the tester sit along with the developer. And you, as the tester Now, being a test consultant, defining requirements sounds a little odd, but I am having to do that because ultimately I'm going to test it. And if I'm going to test it and if I do not know what the requirement actually is, I don't know which way the boat is going. So, to make my life easy, I'm sitting with the customer telling him, okay, please tell me what is it that you're expecting, so that we can implement it that way. We can write the test cases in that fashion and get your test. So I think great session.
Thank you.
And I will be very glad to get connected with all of you. So I think through Fırat or through Meli, I will share my LinkedIn profile. I'm sorry I did not get my business cards today, otherwise I would have shared them with you. But please feel free to get in touch with me.
Thank you so much. Anyone else? Yeah, would you like to add something?
Yes.
Would you like to come here? It's good to speak with the people, but we don't have,
Hi. Just quick introduction. Umut Kahraman Kaptan, working basically at NATO. The problem I would like to also discuss with the gauge and all the other options with BDD approach. It is more or less like a buzzword of the new generation. I feel a little bit old in there. It's all about requirement management, requirement engineering. If you cannot talk with your customer what it's supposed to be, that was the problem of the test-driven development IDE. It was having great unit tests, but at the end you have an abomination as a software. It is nothing that customer wants, but it is passing all the tests. It is all green, except the customer being happy. Let's go back to the basics. Let's go back to zero. You need to make your customer happy. Your goal is not to find bugs as testers. Your goal is to ensure that customer gets value like everybody else on your team. So to customer get the value, they need to get the right software without having major problems. Actually, the difference between BDD and TDD is the approach of shell to core, or let's say user experience to code, or code to user experience you're going. What Gauge helps you in there, you start writing your acceptance actually, basically, and the UI of the tool helps you or helps your developer to say that, oh, I need that function too, because it is not connected anywhere. You just say that, please create a function for me so I can start doing things. You start your test case from there, and from the test case, by clicking at ED, you say, okay, I now also need to start writing the actual code. Now I write the test according to the BDD, I write the TDD part of it. Now I should write the code. I have to say that it is not about tools. Tools will help you, but the biggest problem I see in there, the mindset is not changing. If your user does not really want to involve, that is what is happening when you have military or when you have government generally. They just want something and they just run away. If you do not have a good handshake, even on a document, like a contract, or like a gentleman's agreement, like being open and honest to each other in a meeting, you will not achieve anything with the tools. Tools are the new weapons, but war is war at the end. We need to just make it work. So I would like to state that even it just gives a great value, still it ends with you. It is not stealing your work. It is actually easing your work, but still you need to deal with people.
Yeah. Thank you.
Anyhow, thank you.
Please go on.
Question on the Gauge. You compared a couple of times with Cucumber, but I think it's very much close actually to fitness, at least from what I saw.
Yeah.
You know fitness?
Yeah.
What would you say? Is it just fitness with Markdown?
Yes.
Or is there something else?
Yeah, the approach is very similar, but the value we bring more than is. I don't want to just do advertisement, but behind that we also have some the ready framework as opposed to the fitness. I mean the ready the functions more than this, specifically for the industry. We also have some sort of AI functionalities, for example, which can handle, which can measure the tester's behavior or the user's behavior and can generate the automatic scenarios itself. So this is something really, really different and beyond the fitness. But at the end, what we generated, I mean, very close to what you said, you know that what I mean. But the code, the things we generate is just automatic. You even don't need to type anything else. I mean, in my demo, if you see, we do in very dummy one. You know, we just generated a project and there was a test case run on some system, and you know there were results. But we are able to generate other detailed scenarios without any touch, like, you know, the buying goods, listing goods, products, adding to basket, and something like that. That is something different we do. Yeah. Anything else? Okay. Thank you. It's now break time. Actually, we passed the break time. So we start at 8, I guess. Yeah. Good.